What's up, you guys? It's Simon. Welcome back to my channel. I hope everybody is having a happy Halloween so far. So speaking of Halloween, I thought it would be fun to do an updated shading tutorial with this kind of spooky batwing liner illustration, and kind of just do a more updated shading tutorial, like I said, because I've been getting a lot of questions to do so on TikTok, or I guess requests to do so on TikTok. And while I do have one up on the channel currently, it's a little bit outdated as far as my personal style goes, and it's also a little bit on the longer side. So I thought I would just make things a little bit more concise now that I know exactly what it is that I'm trying to tell you guys about. That being said, if you have seen that previous video, go ahead and skip to the timestamp that I have placed on screen, because as far as the kind of technical aspects I kind of personally do as far as choosing color and things like that goes, have not changed, but I am going to again reiterate those, or reiterate that in this video for those of you that haven't seen it. But anyways, if you've seen it, go ahead and skip ahead. If you haven't, stay right here. So the first thing that I want to talk about is line art. And the main thing to kind of keep in mind when working with your line art is try to keep in mind, what is your subject matter? Are you painting a scene? Are you painting a person, a plant, an animal? Just try to keep that in mind, and then think, what is the tone of your illustration? Is it a warm tone? Is it a cool tone? What overall color surrounds this subject? Are you painting an orange tabby? Maybe think of like an orange or a brown line art. If you're painting a plant, kind of think of a teal, a blue, a green, something like that. If you're planting a scene, is it a warm tone scene? Is it a cool tone scene? Is it a person? Do they have a warm undertone, a cool undertone, things like that. I used to say just do red or purple, because that is generally still valid to say that those two colors will suit whatever it is that you're working on. But lately I have been kind of experimenting more with using like different colored line arts, like blue and green and stuff like that. So yeah, just try to keep in mind, what is the overall tone and hue of your illustration, and then pick a line art color that suits that. Also, something I totally forgot to mention in the beginning is this is how I personally pick colors and shade and do things like that. This is in no way a video that's trying to tell you you have to do colors like this, you have to do it this way and no other way, this is the only valid way. No. This is just how I personally do things, things that I have personally found have made my art better, but take everything I say with a grain of salt. If you like to use like just straight black for your line art, use straight black, it doesn't matter. But if you are going to use a color, the next thing I want to mention is always set that line art layer to multiply. And the reason that I say that is because when you set it to multiply, you can put legitimately any color, any hue, any value of color underneath without having to change it. Especially I want to mention this for darker colors, because you can see how the line art has already darkened itself and made it sort of a different shade. And the reason that I say that that is important is because if this were set to normal, let's actually slide it, hello. If this were set to normal, you can see that it's super blown out on those dark colors, and also on the more mid-tones, it's kind of washed out. You can't see the line art very well. Even if I were to switch these up, so these are kind of pinks and purples, so if I were to change the hue, even if I made it like, kind of orangey like this, you can still see that the line art either is blown out or washed out, which is not something that you want. It also saves you the trouble of having to go through later. I know a lot of artists like to kind of work with black line art and then set it to alpha lock and kind of change and adjust their line art colors based on the base colors that they've chosen at the end. But if you were to just start with multiply in the first place, like I just showed you, you can put any color underneath it and your line art layer will suit whatever base color that you use. So you can kind of save yourself the trouble of having to go through and do all of that. So that being said, the next thing that I want to talk about is how I choose my colors. So I like to do this thing that I call the stair-step method, and just to reiterate, I did not create this method. I've seen it on several color theory videos. It's just something that I find really helps me with my art style and choosing colors and stuff like that. Anyways, so the reason that I call it the stair-step method, I'm going to go ahead and pick a brighter, kind of less natural skin tone color, just so you guys can kind of see just how much the color is affected by my choices. It's a little more subtle when you're using more natural colors, especially in skin tones. So I did blue for the last video. I'm gonna go ahead and do pink this time. So I have my base color selected, and then the reason it's called the stair-step method is because I'm going to go down and, oh wait, no, why did I say that? I'm gonna go to the right and downwards. I know with a lot of beginner artists, their tendency, mine included when I was first starting, is to either go straight down or straight to the right. And it's technically okay. I mean, it's not terrible. This is a little bit more saturated. This is a little bit more overly saturated. It's still technically valid. Like, you can paint like this, but if you notice by the end of your painting, it's looking too bright or too washed out, then the way that you fix that is, again, like I mentioned, that stair-step method. So picking the color this way and going down automatically gives, oh, did not mean to do that. Automatically gives you a more interesting color than if I were to just go straight down or to the right. But if you want to add even more kind of oomph to it, scooch it a little bit towards the purple, and that will create even more kind of contrast, even more interest as far as making your illustration look more interesting. Words are hard, but you know, it does make it look a little bit nicer. It adds a little bit of spice, a little bit of something to your illustration. So yeah, that is how I would choose the shadow, and the same thing goes for the highlight. So I would select whatever color is my base tone, and then I will go up and to the left. Bear with me if that's the wrong direction. I'm really bad at directions. And then I also will scooch it towards the orange. I'm not gonna go quite in towards like the bright red and the bright orange, because I do like it to be kind of a little bit more subtle, just because, you know, you don't want this to be like completely purple and completely orange. While that is totally valid, again, that is a way to create paintings. Sometimes it can look a little bit wonky, so I personally just like to make that hue shift a little bit more subtle, but I want it to still be visible and create that interest. Anyways, now that we have our colors selected, the next thing I'm going to tell you about is kind of like my brushes that I use. So for brushes, I like to use a completely hard round brush. I personally use the monoline that I have adjusted to be ginormous. You don't have to use it ginormous, but I adjusted it because the actual monoline is pretty small, and if you you know, blow it up too big, it does create that pixelation. But because I adjusted the max size of the brush, it does that less often. But the reason that you want to use a completely hard, round, solid, no opacity shift brush is because, as you can see by my swatches here, the brush that I like to use to put down base colors and stuff like that, or to sketch and do my line art with, has a texture to it, and you do not want that texture when you're going in with your colors, because as you can see, it creates like a ghost outline, which is super annoying. And sometimes it's a lot more subtle. Like if I were to use the light, oh my goodness, hello. If I were to use this light color, it almost looks like it's not there. So the last thing you want is to go into a painting, be almost finished, and see that you have all of these little white gaps that you now have to fill. And especially after you've started painting, it can be really frustrating to kind of try to color match and get that blended out so that it looks nice. So in order to prevent that, oh, I erased the colors, that is not good. In order to prevent that, I like to use the monoline brush, or again, a brush similar if you're in a different program, just because it negates that white line. That white line does not happen when working with a completely solid brush like that. unless I leave a gap like a doofus. The other thing that I want to mention is also gap related. I leave this kind of like white outline when I'm doing it because I don't want to follow every single little nook and crevice that I've created in my line art with that monoline brush, especially because it does not have any sort of taper, so I will have to like adjust the brush size and all that to get into all the little cracks. And even then, I could spend like 10 minutes making sure I'm going so perfectly around the line art and realize that there's white spaces that I left because I tried to cover everything. Don't do that. It's a huge time waster. So I just try to kind of go around the edges and then take whatever layer I'm going to add my shadow with or highlight, you know, whatever it is, whatever layer or brush I'm going to paint with, and then go around the edges because it's so much swifter, so much faster. So the next thing is I'm going to start placing my shadows. So the first thing you want to think about when you're placing your shadows is where is your light coming from. 90% of the time when I'm painting, it's coming from the top right corner. I don't always put this little sun in the corner to kind of tell me where I'm painting. Obviously, you guys have seen my videos. I just know that's where it is by now when I do my paintings. But sometimes, you know, for beginners, if you need kind of like a reminder, like, hey, my light source is coming from here, you can draw a little sunshine with the arrow to kind of tell you where stuff is coming from. That being said, I also want to mention it is important to have a reference if you're planning on doing like more dramatic or dynamic lighting or anything like that. Always have a reference. It's really good to look at like things like Pinterest and stuff like that, because they'll have like a lot of really interesting kind of lighting on there, especially like interesting colors and things like that. So if you're looking for something a little bit more dynamic, have a reference, because, you know, light changes a face quite drastically. Anyways, when I create my paintings, regardless of my light source, there are a few places that I will always shade and then kind of like change where or how they look based on my light source later with like a multiply layer or things like that. But if I'm just doing a base painting, that's kind of a bad word for it. If I'm just doing kind of how I normally paint, these are the areas that I always tackle. So the sides of the nose like this. Hi, airplane. Gotta love airplanes. Okay, anyways, so like I was saying before, I like to put some shadows on the side of the nose, and one of the things I like to keep in mind when I'm thinking about where I'm placing my shadows, if you're somebody who is into makeup or wears makeup or whatever, think of where you would place highlight and contour, and those are kind of the general places where I also put shadow or highlight. So for example, this is kind of how a person would contour their nose, not necessarily underneath the nose, but that's where I like to put it. But the, you know, kind of the edges of the bulb of the nose, underneath the nose in some cases, on the sides. And then also the area around your cheek, I kind of like to leave blank, unshaded unless I'm working from my mid-tone. But if I'm working from the highlight, like in this, I will kind of just leave it alone and try to blend around it, because that is obviously where you would put your highlight or your concealer. Some other places I like to put it are the corners of the mouth, underneath the lips, underneath the neck or jaw, and then in previous I kind of just follow, that's the eraser. I kind of just followed the total edge of the face, which is still totally valid. It still looks nice. It's still something that you can do. But lately what I've been doing, another airplane, hello. So like I was saying, it's totally okay to follow the complete edge, but what I've lately been doing is kind of leaving a little bit of a space there, because it kind of adds almost like a sort of rim lighting effect, and it makes it look a little bit more interesting. I don't know if it's necessarily realistic. I've just been enjoying doing it this way. I think it adds a little bit more interest to my paintings. But other than that, there's one more thing that's changed, but everything else is still relatively the same. So doing kind of like the sides of the face like this, following this sort of like crescent shape around the eyes and the forehead, again following just the edge of the face, like I said, underneath the lips, stuff like that. Also underneath the eyelids, if I have this crease there. I don't always draw characters with that. It's usually characters that I imagine to have, is it more deep set or the opposite of deep set. I don't even know what the word for the opposite of deep set eyes are, but somebody with a more prominent under eye crease obviously is when I would put that shading down. I also will take this darkest part sometimes and I will add that underneath, usually around the lip area as well, because that's kind of where some of the shading is a little bit more subtle, so I don't always get the contrast that I want there. And then also around the eyelids, because there's a bit more of a crease, and when you blend this out, it's again kind of similar to the mouth, it's more subtle, so I want to make it a little bit more detailed. I don't really do that here because again this is mostly around highlight, so it doesn't have kind of that issue. Hello, where did you come from? Yeah, so there's not as much of a contrast issue because it is mostly surrounded by lights rather than shadow, but this is mostly shadow around this area, so that's why I kind of try to deepen the shadows a little bit around there. And then the last thing that I have changed as far as my shading style goes is I take the darkest color and then I go underneath the nose like this. Sometimes I follow the line a little bit better. You guys get the idea. I kind of have this hard edge where it is really, really dark. And I did that because one day I had been trying to blend out the shadow that I normally have on the nose, and it wasn't getting enough contrast. It wasn't looking interesting enough. And so I put it there initially intending to completely blend it out. And I realized that I really liked that pop of dark under there. Sometimes I even take the lightest color again and come back in and blend it out back into the nose so that it lightens up a little bit around that area. And I think it looks really, really nice. One thing I also want to mention is in regards to my last shading tutorial, I said something stupid. I said you do not want to have any hard edges, which is ridiculous. If you look at my thumb here, or my hand, I guess you can say, I'll crunch it so you guys can see. When you look around the fingers, like this whole area where it's completely in shadow, I would consider that to be a hard edge. This edge right here along my thumb, I would also consider to be a hard edge, mostly around right here. When it gets toward my wrist, you can see that it starts to diffuse a little bit, and that is what I would consider to be a soft shadow. If you look at the sides of my knuckle right here, I don't know if it's really visible on camera. It's obviously going to change a little bit when I move. But right around here underneath would be a hard shadow. On the sides of my fingers, a soft shadow. So you guys can tell just by looking at my hand that in real life there are hard edges and there are soft edges. So you don't want to have an illustration that's made completely out of soft edges. If you're more of like a cell shader, it's fine to have your illustration be completely hard shadows, but if you're trying to be, you know, kind of a little bit more painterly, you obviously want to, again, like I mentioned, have a mix of hard and soft. You don't want it to be totally hard edges, you don't want it to be totally soft edges. That being said, like I mentioned before, you can do whatever you want. This is just a tip. Hello, airplane. This is just a tip to add more interest and, you know, make your paintings stand out a little bit more. So before I leave you guys, I just want to mention a few tips and tricks as far as digital painting goes. Some things that I've noticed along the way that have made my journey a little bit easier. And the first thing, as you guys can see by this, is set your base tone layer before you start painting. This is as soon as you set your base color down, set it to alpha lock, because then that allows me to blend all over the place. I do not have to worry about getting in this white color from the background and tainting my painting, making it, you know, more desaturated or adding random colors where it shouldn't be. You can really see the effect of this as well when you put your background as a dark color. You can see all of that area that is not supposed to be there. It also just helps prevent you from having to like really painstakingly paint along the edges so that you don't again mix with the background layer. But yeah, in order to prevent that, just remember to set your layer to alpha lock. It will make your life so much easier. I also want to mention, as far as like picking skin tone colors go, kind of back when I was teaching you guys the stair-step method, I particularly noticed this when people try to make sort of darker skin tones, like medium to deep skin tones, is people's first initial reaction is to go for maybe colors like this, which is obviously, as you can see, super desaturated. Like, it looks like this person has no blood. And obviously people have blood. It doesn't matter if you're going for a cool tone, a red tone. Well, yeah, red tone if you're going for a warm tone is the word I was looking for. If you're going for a warm tone or a cool tone, you still don't want to pick from areas like this. Even if you're going for a deep tone, you don't want to go straight down. You do want to kind of like go towards these more saturated areas. It seems like they're overly saturated, but I promise you, it's gonna look a lot nicer than if you were to go straight down towards those other more gray colors. Like you can see, this looks a lot more rich, a lot prettier, a lot more like a person with blood, perhaps. Again, even if you're going for a cool tone, push your pen more towards the purple area and pick a color like this. You can see this still, while it looks on the color wheel like it's a purple, when you put it down, it looks like a human person. Like, this looks like a person's skin tone that has a cool undertone. So yeah, stay away from these gray areas. I promise they're not gonna be your friend. It might seem right when you're picking on the wheel, but it is not. It looks really very zombie, like I mentioned before, very zombie skin tone, way too desaturated. It's better to be more saturated than desaturated, because again, you can also go towards this like hue shift and stuff like that. And while depending on what kind of gray you select, sometimes the hue and saturation slider will help you, but sometimes if you go too gray, sometimes if you make it a little bit too gray, then changing the saturation isn't going to help too much. This was a bad example, but sometimes if you go towards gray, obviously not that gray. Let's try and find. I promise I know, in my brain I know what I'm talking about. So this, where it's pretty gray, if you kind of adjust the saturation, it's still gonna be pretty desaturated. So yeah, you have to be careful when it comes to selecting colors like that. It's better to go more saturated than less saturated, because it's easier to desaturate a color with the slider. If you pick something that's too gray and you try to move it around, it's gonna be gray, it's gonna stay gray. So that is it for my personal little digital painting style. If you guys liked it, don't forget to subscribe and maybe let me know like what other kind of tutorials you guys want to see. If there's anything that you guys think that you like that I do in particular as far as painting and stuff like that goes, let me know. I'd be happy to do a tutorial. I already have a couple up on my channel, but it never hurts to do an updated one, because as artists we know that our styles are always evolving. So you know, if you notice that things have changed, I would love to do an updated tutorial on stuff like that. Also, maybe consider checking out all the links down in the description, where you can find stuff like my Patreon. I've got a ton of cool stuff on there, like digital downloads, prints, stickers, line art, Etsy discounts, all that sort of thing. So if any of that interests you, go ahead and check that out. You can also find another cool reward like shout outs alongside awesome people like Elise Thompson, Duran, Mandy, Schleeps, Crew Heat, and Created by Twins. You guys are the best. Thank you so much for continuing to support me every single month. It means the absolute world to me. Yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope you guys have a happy Halloween, and I'll see y'all in the next one. Bye.